now watching Wayback Wednesday, sponsored by Davenport Auto Park, the ride of your life. And also sponsored by Flores Glass, serving the area since 1977 with residential and commercial work.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Wayback Wednesday. I'm Randy Adcox. Glad you could be with us tonight, and thank you for inviting us into your home. Been a lot going on. Happy New Year, by the way. I hope you all had a nice Christmas and a nice Happy New Year so far. There's a lot going on at our house. I was pleasantly surprised. My daughter and her husband flew in from Texas to spend my birthday, which was yesterday, with us. And they couldn't make it home for Christmas, but I didn't realize that was because they were planning to come for my birthday instead of Christmas. So we missed them at Christmas, but I was glad to have them home for my birthday. So anyway, we've got a lot of ground to cover tonight. We're going to start off by taking a look back at a couple of images from last week's show. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Po My Inn tonight. We've talked about the Po My Inn before. If you recall, it had to be demolished, the building anyway, and removed when they put the overpass over Church Street back in the late 1950s. And so we're going to go back and take a look at the principals, if you will, the owners of the business, who was involved, the family members and so forth. We'll cover all of that. And we're going to look at several spots up and down Church Street and zoom in fact, on a bit of history in the 200 block of Church Street, South Church Street, I should add. Also, we're going to talk about, in past shows we've talked about the Alfred Building and the Douglas Building, and a few weeks back we talked about the Burnett Building. We're going to show you some pictures tonight and talk about a building that was referred to as the Davenport Gardner Building. How many remember where the Davenport Gardner Building was? It's not there anymore. It's been long gone. But it was on Church Street. I'll give you that much of a hint. And even if you don't remember the name of the building, I'm sure you remember some of the businesses that occupied that space over the years. So anyway, we'll get into all that in a few minutes. I guess I don't have anything else to add, other than I do want to just say a quick thank you again. Randy Harrell and Eric Dawson both have been instrumental in the last few weeks of kind of giving me ideas, and Randy's sent some pictures my way. We're going to share another one of those tonight with you. But I always appreciate your input, to viewers, and so anytime during the show, feel free to call in. 407-1111 is our number. And if you've got a topic you want to see and talk about, or if you've got some pictures you want to share with the rest of our viewers, I'll be more than happy to get with them. We'll put them on the air and share them. So with that being said, let's go ahead and put up item number one. If you remember, we showed this picture last week, and it was actually taken from the 1950s. It was actually a snapshot, if you will, from a larger picture. And what you see right in the middle of your screen there, circled with the black circle around it, is a building that actually dates back to the early 1900s. Best I could find was around 1910. That house, if you will, was constructed there. In later years, the house was torn down, and there was another building erected there. And we talked about that building many, many times on the show. And a few weeks ago, we spent a whole show talking about 132 South Church Street, also known as the Duchess Cafe or the Ivy Room or Central Cafe. There's a lot of things there. But that house that you see circled in black there was originally the property of Dr. Suter. We've talked about that before, not his home, but his father's home. And so Dr. Suter's father was a banker, and he actually built this property here back, like I said, around 1910. And there were several businesses that operated out of this space long before it ever became a restaurant. But the address was 132 South Church Street. And we're going to come back to this picture a little bit later on in the show for another building. But Lee, if you will, let's go to item number two. In a 1950 city directory, Rocky Mount City Directory, I just did a screenshot of this page. And you see at the very top of the page, I've got it highlighted in yellow there, is 132 South Church Street. These are all South Church addresses here, of course. But 132 in the 1950s, in the 1950 city directory, in fact, was identified as the Little Antique Shop and the Julia Johnson's Art Studio. Prior to these businesses being in there, it was a residence, like I said, When I refer to Dr. Suter, we've talked about his home in past shows. His was a great big 2-story house. And I'm drawing a blanket on exactly where his house was. I want to say it was off Western Avenue, maybe somewhere in that area. But this was his father's house. His father built this property, let's say in the early 1900s. And long before there was ever a restaurant there, this house was there, and there were various businesses in there. But if we scroll on down the block, down near the bottom, you see at the address of 220 South Church Street, George Robbins Furniture and the Will Row Restaurant at 220 South Church Street. Now, we've talked about the Will Row in past shows too, but this is the first time I remember seeing it listed like this, along with Robbins Grocery. And then, of course, a couple of doors down from that at 228 to 234 was the Gulf Service Station. And then, of course, at 235, the bottom of your list down there, was the Firestone stores. And, of course, this, again, was all 1950 from the 1950 city directory. So as you can see from the 132 address, that was the last building in that block, that 100 block of South Church Street. Then you jumped across Western Avenue and began the 200 block. You see the First Baptist Church on the corner there. And it took up a couple, addresses at the very beginning of the block. But then there were several other buildings, including other churches. The First Church of Christ, of course, was across the street. And you see there were a couple of residences sprinkled along there too. I guess the point is there was a lot of activity, a lot of business and residential and churches along that single block, 200 block of Church Street in 1950. Okay, let's move on. Getting back to 132 South Church Street, I pulled this. This is actually a listing from the Nash County GIS website. If you've never gone to the GIS website, it's just a font of information. It's free, by the way. There's an Edgecombe County website as well. But you can zoom in to a property by a street address. If you know who owns a property, you can do a search by their name. But it will give you all the information about any given property within the city limits of Rocky Mount. There you go. On the left-hand side, you see there, under the ownership category, it lists the suitor, Thomas B. Jr. Ayers. And so, like I said, this was not Dr. Suter's house, but Dr. Suter's father's house. And over the years, it's been handed down from generation to generation. And I just thought it was really neat that here we are in 2023, over 100 years since Dr. Suter's father first built the little house we showed you a minute ago. That property is still in the Suter family name. It's still in their family. So just thought it was kind of something neat about an old, and of course that little shack is long gone, the house is long gone, and the building that was, as I said earlier, it was the Ivy Room, it was the Duchess Restaurant, it was Central Cafe for a while. In the last 6 months, it's been two different, I think it was a place called Hunt's for a while. A gentleman by the name of, I think Mr. Mars had it most recently. I've not been down there in a few weeks now, but hopefully the last gentleman is still in business. But anyway, so let's move on, Lee. Item number 4, if we could. At 235 South Church, if you remember from that previous, there you go, 235 South Church Street, which was across the street a little bit further south from the Suter property, if you will, was the Firestone store. And this was actually, it's hard to make out, but right in the middle of the screen there, this is actually from the Behringer collection. I think this is one that Randy sent me. I'm not certain about that. But I need to give Bugs Behringer credit. This is his photograph. He took this picture. And I'm not sure exactly when it was taken. It was not dated. I'm going to guess in the early 1950s maybe, perhaps a little bit later than that even. But it's just a really neat picture. I always enjoyed going into Firestone stores and Western Auto stores. There's just something about, but these stores, not only were they geared toward automotive products, they would carry things like bicycles, of course, and even things like irons and radios and, just a whole variety of household items in addition to the product line that catered to automobile service and repair and so forth. So just thought it was a neat old picture there. Okay, at the top of the show, I mentioned that we were going to talk a little bit about the Po Mai Inn. And we've discussed it before in past shows. If you recall, we talked about how the Po Mai Inn had to be demolished when they built the overpass over Church Street. And so Eric came by my office earlier this week and said it'd be interesting to him to see a little bit of history about who owned the business, how the name came to be. He already knew that the POMI was an abbreviation for two families, the Powers family, not Powell, but Powers, and the Miller family, spelled Millar as opposed to an ER spelling. It was AR. And so I went on the hunt. I went hunting trying to find out what I could find out about the POMI restaurant. I'm sorry, POMI Inn. And so the first thing I want to do was kind of give you an idea about what we're talking about specifically. So Lee, if you would, put up item number 5 for our viewers. What we're looking at here, there you go. This is actually 608 South Church Street, okay? You're looking basically west, stand in the middle of Church Street here. You see the overpass over to your right. And the address of this house, as I said, is 608. The POMI Inn would have been to the right of this property. It's a little bit north of this property. The actual physical address was 602. So it would have been just to the right. As you can see, the overpass came right through there. So the POMI had to be demolished and to make room for the overpass. But this house is still here. So I thought, okay, and Eric, in fact, had asked me to look and see if we could find out whether one or more of the parties that were partnership with the POMI Inn lived here. And so I went pursuing that line of research. And there was also a question about exactly when the POMI Inn came into existence. There was some indication that it could have been as early as the really early 1900s, like 1916, 1917, somewhere along in there. So I went, as I quite often do, went back to my old standby, the newspapers.com website, went to my Rocky Mount City directories, and went all the way back to, I started at 1900 and worked my way forward. Oddly enough, at 602 South Church Street, there was a business there as early as 1916, but it was not the POMI Inn. No, sir, the POMI Inn had not come into existence in 1916. But another well-known business had set up shop at 602 South Church Street. Lee, if you would put up item number 6 for our viewers. In the Rocky Mount Telegram, November 21st of 1916, this ad appeared. And you see the headline said, if you have hides, furs, tallow, beeswax, rags, bags, auto tires, or any kind of rubber, bring or ship to NC Hide and Fur Company. And you see the address there, 602 South Church Street. So long before the POMI Inn ever set up shop at 602 South Church Street, NC Hide and Fur was there. And of course, in later years, they moved out off the Halifax Road. And some years ago, they in fact changed the name from NC Hide and Fur to Rocky Mount Recyclers. And then they changed the name again to Regional Material Recyclers. But their start, the earliest I could find a listing for NC Hide and Fur was this right here at 602 South Church Street in 1916. Okay, so let's move on, Lee. We mentioned POMI was the abbreviation for two family members, the Powers family and the Miller family. So how were they connected and how did they get started and when did the POMI Inn come into existence? Well, as it turns out, Mr. Powers and Mr. Miller were not only business partners, they were family. In fact, Mr. Powers' daughter married Mr. George H. Miller. George H. Miller was the husband of Mr. Powers' daughter. And as early as the 1914-1915 Rocky Mount City Directory, these two gentlemen were in business together. Lee, if you would put up item number 7 for our viewers. This is an ad that appeared in the Rocky Mount City Directory from 1914-1915. And you see there, at the upper left-hand corner, it lists Mr. James Powers. In the right-hand corner, it lists Mr. George H. Miller. And the name of their business was the Washington Street Market. Powers and Miller were proprietors. You see that fancy groceries, the very best fresh and cured meats, fish and oysters, country produce, a specialty. And the address was 127 South Washington Street. So again, these gentlemen started their business at a fairly early time frame in Rocky Mount. This was from the 1914/1915 Rocky Mount City Directory, and Mr. Powers and his son-in-law, George H. Miller, were already in business together and already serving the community of Rocky Mount. Okay, Lee, let's move on to item number 8. Also in the 1914-1915 City Directory, I found this listing And this is basically the Powers family. And you see up at the very top, the very first one is James Powers. And his home address you see here, and just keep in mind, this is 1914, 1915. The home address is 311 East Thomas Street. If you go on down, right just below him is James H. Powers, butcher, at 310 East Thomas Street. Okay? And then a couple more down, Powers and Miller, James Powers and George H. Miller were their fresh meats and groceries business at 127 South Church Street. So again, they were in business together at a very early time frame here in Rocky Mount, and they started out in the grocery business from a little grocery store on South Washington Street. Okay, Lee, item number 9. This is the Powers family you see, and now this is the Miller family. I did a search, and the Miller family didn't quite get here as early as the Powers family did, but by 1930, the Rocky Mount City Directory had this listing. You see there, the very first of the Miller with an AR, M-I-L-L-A-R, is Eliza P. Miller, the widow of William E. And you see the address, 608 South Church Street. That ring a bell? That house I just showed you a few moments ago on Church Street that's still standing today is 608 South Church Street. So when the Millers first came to Rocky Mount and set up a residence, they were living at 608 South Church Street. And you see there, just beneath the widow lady, is George H., and he married Polly S. Okay, Polly was Mr. James Powers' daughter. And you see the business there listed. He was a principal in Powers and Miller. And again, the address of their home is 608 South Church Street. And then, of course, George P. Miller was their son. George H. and Polly had a son. His name was George P. And, of course, he also lived at 608 South Church Street. So this is a 1930 Rocky Mount City Directory. Okay, let's move on then to item number 10. This is from the 1930 Rocky Mount City Directory also. And it lists, you see there, James Powers of Powers and Miller, a resident at 608 South Church Street. Now, if you remember a few moments ago, we showed you where James Powers was living at, 310 East Thomas Street. That was a 1914, 1915 city directory. By 1930, Mr. James Powers, who was the father of Polly, had moved in with his daughter and her husband at the 608 South Church Street address. So by 1930, the Powers family and the Miller family were living together at 608 South Church Street. And you see there, again, this is 1930, and you see that the address, 608, and then down below, I got sidetracked there, the general merchandise has now moved. The general merchandise store, instead of being on South Washington Street, is now at 602 South Church Street. Now, keep in mind, this still predates the Po-My Inn. This is 1930. The Po-My Inn has not come into existence yet. But Powers and Miller had moved their grocery store business from the 127 South Washington Street address over here to 602 South Church Street. Okay? All right, I'll tell you what, Lee, let's take our first commercial break. I say it's a little bit, it's almost past time for it actually. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about Po-My Inn and some of the other businesses that were working in conjunction with Po-My. There were actually other businesses that set up shop inside the inn there, if you would. So don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back with more Wayback Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
There's a main nerve that leaves your back that goes into your hip and goes down your leg. It's called the sciatic nerve. A back injury can put pressure on that nerve, causing pain, numbness, tingling. Chiropractors can actually help that. At the Hammer Chiropractic Center on Sunset, we know exactly what to do. We have very good relationships with the doctors in Rocky Mount. We like to co-manage people's care. Some medications may help us do our jobs, and our jobs may help their medications work better.
Are you looking for the perfect space for your business in Rocky Mount? Discover the individual offices available on the 4th floor of the Healthview Capitol Building in downtown Rocky Mount. These offices provide a professional environment with stunning views, ample natural light, and modern amenities in a secure environment. Join a community of thriving businesses and elevate your company to new heights. Rent includes utilities and Wi-Fi, and for an additional fee, you can have access to the building's gym. Schedule a tour today by calling Leanne Wester at 252-977-1616, extension 1012.
And we're back. Quick note about something I mentioned earlier. NC Hyde & Fur, as I said, set up shop over on 602 South Church Street. And then when they moved from there, before they moved to Halifax Road, they actually moved over to Washington Street. And I do remember seeing a listing. I forgot to put that in my notes here. But Bob Lee just sent me a text and said that they were on Washington Street right across from Carolina Tire. So I appreciate that, Bob. But anyway, so we're talking about the Palmi Inn and the fact that the Powers residents, Mr. James Powers, and his daughter, who was married to George H. Miller, by 1930 were all living together in the same house, 608 South Church Street, which was right beside the Palmi Inn and a few years later. So I wanted to see exactly when the Palmi Inn first came into existence. And so, as I said, when I went back through the city directories and went back through the newspapers.com website, the very earliest mention I could find for the Palmi restaurant was actually 1934. So Lee, if you would put up item number 11 for our viewers. This is an excerpt from the 1934 Rocky Mount City Directory. And by 1934, the Palmi Inn was indeed in operation. And you see the address there, 602 to 604 South Church Street. So it actually took up two addresses there. That's interesting because, as I said earlier, there were actually a number of businesses that gave that address as their business address. Some said, within the Palmi building or second floor of the Palmi building. But there were, and I'll show you some ads in a moment that illustrated this, how the other businesses would actually set up shop inside the Palmi Inn. Okay, let's move on then. So 1934, this is the earliest that I could find a listing for the Palmi being in operation. And this is actually from 1934 also. This from the Rocky Mount Telegram, April the 2nd, 1934. This is interesting here too. Now, we've talked about the Palmi Inn, the Palmi Inn, the Palmi Inn. But the first listing in the Rocky Mount Telegram lists it as Hotel Palmi. Not the Palmi Inn, but Hotel Palmi. And you see you could rent a room by the day, the week, or month. Modern conveniences, special weekly and monthly rates. And you see the address, 602 South Church Street. So it's odd that in the Rocky Mount Telegram ad in 1934, April of 1934, it's listed as Hotel Palmi, but in the 1934 Rocky Mount City Directory, it's listed as the Palmi Inn. So obviously they changed the name. I guess after consideration, they decided the Palmi Inn sounded better than the Hotel Palmi for whatever reason. But anyway, let's move on to item number 13 if we could. By 1934 again, I did find a little bit later in July, this is July, this is a few short months after the ad I just showed you, where it was being advertised as the Hotel Palmi. That was in April. This ad came out in July of 1934. And you see now they're actually switched over with the same naming scheme as what's in the Rocky Mount City Directory in 1934, the Palmi Inn. And of course you see the address in the bottom left-hand corner, 602 South Church Street. So by 1934, the Palmi Inn was indeed in business, operating at 602 South Church Street. And this was just the first of many businesses that occupied this space here. Some, in fact, at the same time the Po My Inn did. Okay, let's move on then, Lee. Sadly, in November 1937, one of the original owners of the Po My Inn, Mr. James Powers, passed away. He had lived here for 23 years, and he had been in failing health, it said, for some time. It says here, Mr. Powers had made his home in Rocky Mount for the last 23 years, being associated in business with his son-in-law as Powers and Miller. He had been in ill health for several months, but his condition was not regarded as serious until a few days prior to his death. Survivors include his daughter, Mrs. George H. Miller, with whom he had made his home, two grandchildren, Miss Jamie Miller and George P. Miller, and one brother, Frank Powers of Norfolk. So again, James Powers and his son-in-law set up the business as partners. They ran it together for many years, and like I said, 1937, Mr. Powers sadly passed away. Okay, fast forward a little bit, Lee. 1940, item number 15. From the 1940 Rocky Mount City Directory, we have this listing in the 600 block of South Church Street. At 600 was GP Cash Market Grocery. At 602 to 604 was the Po My Inn Hotel. 608 was the Po My Inn Annex. Keep in mind that was the residence of both the Powers and the Millers a few years earlier. But by 1940, I guess they had vacated the house as a residence and converted it into an annex. And you see by a couple lines down there near the bottom at 612 South Church Street, George P. Miller, who was the son of George H. Miller, the original co-owner of the Po My Inn and the grocery store, was living at 612 South Church Street on the same side of the street in the same block, a few doors further south. So anyway, that was 1940. Also in the 1940 City Directory, item number 16, if you would, Lee, I found this listing for the Miller family. By 1940, the Miller family had also, of course, moved out of 608 South Church Street and had relocated into the 1100 block of Hammond Street. George H. and his wife Polly, and by the way, you see in parentheses it says here GP Cash Market, so that was run by George Miller and his wife after Mr. Powers passed away. And then, of course, you see down below that, Polly S. Miller was the manager of the Po My Inn, and of course, her and her husband lived at 1104 Hammond Street. All righty, so Mr. Miller was not only a businessman and an entrepreneur, he was actually a farmer, and he decided to go into the political ring. Item number 17, if you would, Lee. In the Rocky Mount Telegram, March the 18th, 1942, this article appeared listing that Mr. G.H. Miller was filing for the 6th Ward seat. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. Just real briefly, it says here, the candidate has been a resident of Rocky Mount since 1914 when he came here as a member of the grocery firm of Powers and Miller. I just realized I misspoke a while ago. I think I said that the Miller family didn't get here till much later than the Powers family, but according to this, by as early as 1914, the Miller family was here also, at least George H. Miller was. So when he came here as a member of the grocery firm of Powers and Miller. Their first store was opened on Washington Street that year, and in 1915, the firm opened a new grocery on South Church Street. They were responsible also for the building of the first brick business establishment on Church Street. So how about that? It goes on to say the firm of Powers and Miller then set up and operated a Po My Inn. For 11 years, the inn, which took its name from the first 2 letters of each of the firm names, has been under their operation. The candidate is a surviving member of the firm. Miller, who resides at the inn, this is 1942. In 1942, George H. Miller was living there in the Po My Inn. It says, who resides in the inn, does active farming and building. This is the first time he's run for any public office. So after being in business for quite a few years and being quite successful at it, he decided to have a go at politics. I'm sorry to say I did not pursue that lead to see how far he went and whether or not he won that award. I'll try to get that information between now next week's show and have it for you next week. But in any case, he did go into politics. Okay, so I mentioned that there were other businesses that occupied the space at times along with the Po My Inn, and one such business was a jewelry store, believe it or not. As you see here, this is from the December 22nd, 1945. The Rocky Mount Telegram had this ad, and it's the Valentine and Garner Jewelry Store, and the address is actually, it's hard to see, it looks like 600 South Church Street, but over on the right-hand side at the very bottom, it does say Po My Inn Building. So they were occupying a space within the Po My Inn in 1945 selling jewelry. Okay. By 1950, another business had also decided to set up a little shop within the Po My Inn. If you would, number 19, Lee. March 24th, 1950, this ad appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram for a business referred to as Parham Drug Sundries. So, Sam, if you're watching, if this is your kinfolk, give us a call, 407-1111. We're not sure. But in any case, in 1950, March 24th, 1950, this ad appeared, Parham Drug Sundries, Po My Inn Building, open daily from 8:30 to 10 p.m., open Sunday from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Boy, that's a long day. And it looks to be 7 days a week. It sure does. Special prophylactic nylon toothbrushes, 59 cents. We deliver. We have Nunley's candles, Mellow Ice Cream, papers, magazines, and patent medicines. Plenty of parking space in the Po My Inn parking lot. So Mr. Miller and his wife, because by this time Mr. Powers, of course, had passed away, but Mr. Miller and his wife were actively running the inn, and they were allowing these other companies to come in, set up shop, and operate within the confines of the Po My Inn. Now, Lee, I want to do something here. I want to skip, because I got my images out of order. So if you would, Lee, let's go ahead and skip straight to item number 21. And we're going to come back to item number 22. Okay, here we go. By 1958, George Miller himself, George H. Miller, passed away also. It said he was a native of Hereford County. He was a retired merchant and farmer and a former resident of Rocky Mount. Anyway, you know, if you think about it, this was December 29th, 1958. This obituary appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram. By this time, of course, the Po My Inn had been demolished because the construction on the overpass over Church Street had already begun. And so I don't know, it doesn't say here whether he was in ill health enough that he didn't realize or didn't see what had been constructed there where the Po My Inn used to be. But he died as the overpass was being constructed over Church Street in 1958. Okay. All right, so let's go to number 22 if we could then, Lee. He died in 1958. His wife, Mrs. Polly, lived considerably longer than her husband did. She died May the 10th of 1974. She was 83 when she died. And it says she was a native of Deep Creek, Virginia, and had been a Rocky Mount resident for approximately 60 years. A pioneer among early businesswomen of the Rocky Mount community, she operated the Po My Inn on South Church Street for many years with her husband, the late George H. Miller. She was a member of the First Baptist Church. Surviving one daughter, two grandsons, and a few other nieces and so forth, granddaughters and so forth. So anyway, that was kind of the end of the partnership, if you will, between the Powers family and the Miller family when all the principals had passed away. Okay, Lee, now let's go back briefly to item number 20. I think that's where here we go. I mentioned at the top of the show the Davenport Gardner building. Now, if that doesn't ring a bell with you, it did not with me either, frankly. For one reason, I wasn't alive when it was built. But these two local businessmen, David Davenport, and yes, that's the David Davenport of Davenport Motor Company, and James Gardner, and yes, that's the James Gardner of the dairy company here in Rocky Mount. Mr. Davenport and Mr. Gardner became friends, business associates, and in 1950, they built a brand new building that was located at 228 South Church Street, and it was referred to as the Davenport Gardner Building. Okay, so keeping that in mind, we're going to show you a picture in a minute with that building. But much like the Po Mayen building, this Davenport Gardner building, though it housed primarily a couple of businesses downstairs during its run, if you will, there was always additional businesses operating upstairs. This was a two-story building, and there was quite a few businesses that operated the second floor of this building at 228 South Church Street. Okay, Lee, let's go ahead and go to number 24 if we could. Item number 24. This double ad here caught my attention for a couple of reasons. When I was getting ready for tonight's show, I was browsing through some listings, and you see on the left-hand side there, it was ironic that I was researching the Davenport Gardner building and stumbled across this ad just today. But of course, Gardner's on my Gardner's Dairy was owned by Mr. James Gardner, who was Jim Gardner, later the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. His father was also James Gardner. And so he run the dairy company. And of course, we mentioned earlier, the Wilrow restaurant was located at 220 South Church Street, which was right down the road, a few doors down, I should say, from the Davenport Gardner building that was built at 228 South Church Street. So now you kind of got an idea about where we're talking about. But let's go back, Lee, item number 25. This is the exact same picture we showed at the very beginning of the show. But if you recall, right there with the black circle is the original home of Dr. Suter's father, the banker, he wasn't a doctor, he was a banker, Mr. Suter. But there in the bottom left-hand corner, highlighted with the yellow rectangle there, that was the Davenport Gardner building, constructed in 1950. You may recognize it as the Western Auto building. You may also recognize it as another business that occupied that space many years later. But this was taken sometime in the early 1950s, before the Suter home was torn down and the restaurant building was erected on that site. But you see there, this building on the corner, and of course across the street from this building that's highlighted in yellow was the Firestone building. So, all right, so Lee, let's move on then. Item number, well, I'll tell you what let's do, Lee. Let's bring it back to me. Let's take our next commercial break, and we'll come back. We're going to show you some more ads and talk a little bit more about the Davenport Gardner building and some of the other businesses that occupied that space over the years. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Wayback Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
There's a main nerve that leaves your back that goes into your hip and goes down your leg. It's called the sciatic nerve. A back injury can put pressure on that nerve, causing pain, numbness, tingling. Chiropractors can actually help that. At the Hammer Chiropractic Center on Sunset, we know exactly what to do. We have very good relationships with the doctors in Rocky Mount. We like to co-manage people's care. Some medications may help us do our jobs, and our jobs may help their medications work better.
Are you looking for the perfect space for your business in Rocky Mount? Discover the individual offices available on the 4th floor of the HealthView Capitol building in downtown Rocky Mount. These offices provide a professional environment with stunning views, ample natural light, and modern amenities in a secure environment. Join a community of thriving businesses and elevate your company to new heights. Rent includes utilities and Wi-Fi, and for an additional fee, you can have access to the building's gym. Schedule a tour today by calling Leanne Wester at 252-977-1616, extension 1012.
Okay, we're back. We're back. As I said, the Davenport Gardner Building was built in 1950, and there was a real big to-do when this building was opened up initially. I mean, you had two prominent Rocky Mount businessmen involved in this project. It was in a very popular section of town. Church Street back in the 1950s, you got to remember, was the main thoroughfare. It was 301. And so there was a lot of traffic. That was just a booming section of Rocky Mount, all up and down Church Street, and literally for a couple of blocks east and west of Church Street, too, for that matter. So anyway, let's go ahead, Lee, and put up item number, what's our next one, 26, I think it is? Number 26. This ad appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram when the Western Auto Store opened up in the Davenport Gardner Building. The ad appeared June the 8th of 1950. Now, this was one of those congratulatory ads, and we've talked about these many times on the show, where one local business puts an ad or was a part of an ad that's congratulating another new business. In this case, the North State Construction Company that was at 830 Carr Street, I guess they were somehow involved in the construction of this building, but they're congratulating the Western Auto Store on their formal opening, which is tomorrow, in the new Davenport Gardner Building at 228 South Church Street. So again, this is a brand new building. It was, erected with the partnership of David Davenport of Davenport Motor Company and James Gardner of the Gardner Dairy Firm. And this wouldn't be their only venture, by the way. These two gentlemen would engage in another significant venture, and I'll get to that a little bit later on. But number 27, Lee, this was the formal opening article that appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram, and in the same time frame, the same issue, I should say, as that previous article ad. And this was also June the 8th, 1950. It's a rather long article. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just briefly, it says, the new Western Auto Store at 228 South Church Street will be formally open Friday, June the 9th, according to J.C. Wilson of Greensboro, Division Manager for Western Auto Supply Company. The store will occupy the new building erected by James C. Gardner and wife and D.W. Davenport and wife of Rocky Mount, who have leased the ground floor to Western Auto. Mr. Wilson said the new store will incorporate many newest developments in retail merchandising methods and customer shopping conveniences. It will stock representative lines of Western Auto merchandise, which includes more than 10,000 different items for car and home. I guess, Western Auto stores will always have a soft spot in my heart. When I was 12 years old, my dad took me to the Western Auto Store and bought me my first shotgun. And I wish I could say I still had it. Sadly, I don't know. At some point, I think it got stolen. Our house got broke into when I was a teenager, and I think the gun got stolen then, and I never recovered it. But in any case, I used to love going into the Western Auto stores. It was much like the Firestone stores and some of the other automotive-related stores. They often carried a bunch of other stuff. As I said, bicycles and roller skates and toys, and it was just a neat place for a young fellow to go into, and I loved going into those stores. Much like I do love going to Lowe's today. We got a call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller. You on the air?
Randy.
Yes, sir.
This is Sam Parham.
Hey, Sam.
I've been looking at your show, and I was looking at the Palmyra Inn building, and my father did open a drugstore there back in the 1950s after the railroad had a big layoff here.
Okay.
And he tried a new business adventure at that location before the overhead bridge came there.
Right.
And there were several businesses there. There's the Valentine Jewelry Store, the drugstore, the hotel entrance, and there was a place called Ham's Wholesale.
Okay.
And so that was a very active corner there on South Church Street for a long time.
Well, when I saw the Parham name, I figured it had to be related to you somehow. So that was your father, you're saying?
That was my father, right. It was about 1952 or 3, I think, when they finally started to tell them that they had to tear the building down.
Yeah, it was demolished sometime prior to 58 because in 58 they had already begun construction on the overpass going across there. So yeah, it was torn down sometime prior to that for sure.
Right. There was a lot of businesses up and down Church Street then, like the was the big banana distribution point for all of Eastern Carolina, right there, real close by there on the railroad track.
Yes. I've got pictures of that building. In fact, we've talked about it on a prior show. Sure did.
Right. If you go on down, my home place is at 722 South Church Street. My great grandmother built that house in 1902.
No kidding.
And that house is at the corner of Church and High. And as far as I know, it's the only house that anyone is living in between Henry Street and the library.
So the house is still standing, you're saying?
The house is still standing. We tried to preserve that house as our home place.
Wow, that's great. That's great. I love to hear stories like this.
And I want to tell you, too, Vivian Davis has a chair and a vase that came out of the Palmyra Inn.
Really?
And she's asked me to photograph it so you could show it on your program sometime.
Okay.
Her mother-in-law went there when they were selling the stuff out and bought that chair and a vase.
No kidding. Well, I'd love to see it. You have to go by and get a picture and bring to me.
That's right. We'll try to do that for you.
Okay, buddy.
Enjoy the show.
Thank you, man. Thanks for calling in. We'll see you. Bye-bye. Okay. Yeah, when I saw Pam, I said, that's got to be related to Sam somehow. And I knew he watched the show. So thanks, Sam, for calling in and sharing that with us. It thrills my soul to hear about a house that was built in 1902 that is still standing and still being occupied today, 122 years later. That's incredible. That's incredible. Okay, Lee, let's move on then. Item number 28. We were talking about the various businesses that occupied the Davenport Gardner building, in addition to the Western Auto, which had the entire ground floor. It was a two-story building, as I said, and Western Auto had the initial lease on the ground floor. But upstairs, there were several spaces that were rented, and one of those spaces was rented to Olin Mills Studio. I'm not certain about this, but I remember going to Olin Mills Studio and having my picture taken. And if I had to guess, I would say it was most likely in this place here. I don't know how long they were there. I wasn't around in 1950. I wasn't born then. So if they were there, in later years, I very well could have gone there. But they moved around too. I know they were in at least one other spot that I remember. This is pretty neat to me that they were occupying a space above the Western Auto store in 1950. Okay, let's move on to number 29. November 13th, 1952, this Western Auto ad appeared, and I mentioned a while ago about just a widely varying list of inventory that they carried and merchandise items that they carried. In this one ad, there's a bicycle, there's an oil heater, there's a semi-automatic washing machine, car batteries, of course, oil filters, the pedal cars. He used to love going to these places and seeing his pedal cars. And of course, as I said, there was electric irons, electric mixers, electric drills, just a wide variety of different types of. There were toys in the bottom left-hand corner of the ad. It's kind of hard to see, I know, in this picture here. But Western Auto was just a neat store to go into. It was for me anyway. I'm sure a lot of the folks had the same awe, if you will, of going to the store and looking around and seeing all the different types of merchandise they had on display. But it was a neat store. Okay, I mentioned earlier that Mr. Davenport and Mr. Gardner were business partners. They built this building, and there were several businesses that occupied it over the years. But they didn't stop here. They continued to run their respective businesses. Mr. Davenport, of course, very active with Davenport Motor Company. Mr. Gardner was still active with the Gardner Dairy. But in 1955, October of 1955, they embarked on yet another venture together. And it was none other than the Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge. Item number 30, if you would, Lee. This article appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram with an artist drawing there. It's not such great quality. I'm sorry about that. That's just the way it appeared in the paper. This is not a photograph as much as just an artist's conception. But the caption reads, "Architect's drawing of the Howard Johnson Motor Lodge and Restaurant to be constructed near the north end of the new Highway 301 bypass 3 miles north of Rocky Mount is shown above. At left in the sketch is the ultra-modern restaurant with seating capacity of 109. The 36-unit Motor Lodge with accompanying swimming pool extends from the center of the sketch to the right. The Gate Lodge or office is located in the center of the sketch. A service station not shown on the sketch will also be built on this 6-acre tract. Total cost of the development, including construction and equipment, will be $450,000. And it mentions down in the article, partners in the enterprise are David W. Davenport, Arthur L. Tyler, and that's Mr. Tyler from Belt Tyler's, I do believe, and James C. Gardner. It says Davenport is president of Davenport Motor Company. Tyler is general manager of Belk Stores, there you go, and Gardner is president and treasurer of Gardner's Dairy Products Incorporated. So as I said, they were very successful in their own right. They got together and launched this venture to get this Howard Johnson's, or later known as Hojo's, Hojo's Motor Lodge. And that's another thing from a bygone era. You rarely hear about a motor lodge anymore. There are some motels and hotels out there. The bigger chains have kind of gobbled up and ran the little ones out of business. You see the Marriotts and the Days Inn and some of these other Wyndham and other bigger chain motels. But the smaller little motor lodges like the Hojo's and so forth have kind of gone by the wayside, sadly. Okay, let's move on, Lee. Item number 31. By 1956, July 28, 1956, this ad appeared announcing the opening of the Billy Hair Stylist, Monday, July 30th, one of the South's leading hairstylists, in a shop of her own at 204 Davenport Gardner Building over Western Auto in front of Sears. Billy, formerly associated with the Kaiser Beauty Shop, invites all her friends and customers to visit her at this new address. And so you see there at the bottom, it says Billy Hairstylist, 204 Davenport Gardner Building. So the building itself had an address, and then each space within the building had its own address. Those upstairs, I should say, because whatever was downstairs had the main address, and then those spaces upstairs each had their own individual address. Okay, I mentioned that Western Auto was not the only business to occupy the downstairs floor of the Davenport Gardner Building. In fact, by 1980, Western Auto had moved out and they were gone. And in November of 1980, this ad appeared, number 32 if you would, Lee, advertising a new furniture store in Rocky Mount. And many of you may remember Broughton's Furniture Store. Broughton's Furniture Store occupied this same space that Western Auto had previously been occupying. And you see the address there at the bottom is listed as 228 South Church Street. So as I said, whichever business was located downstairs utilized the same address as the building itself. The building itself had an address of 228 South Church Street. Those entities that were located upstairs had varying addresses depending on where they were located upstairs. And I'm not sure how many. I'm thinking it would probably, it could be as many as a half a dozen spaces, offices and such up there on the second floor. But anyway, this was when Broughton's moved in. Number 33, if you would, Lee. This was from 1982, just 2 short years later. It says, we are overstocked. All Whirlpool refrigerators in stock at dealer cost, cash only. They had a massive refrigerator sale. They had, of course, several on display here. But this, again, is Broughton's Furniture and Appliance Center at 228 South Church Street. So, as I said before, there were the upstairs portion of the building had various offices in it, and different tenants occupied those spaces. Number 34, if you would, Lee. This ad appeared July 31st, 1983, and some of you may remember architect Gary Gluck had his office there. It says the office of R. Gary Gluck, AIA, Architect Planners, has announced that it has changed its location from 408 Sunset Avenue to 228 South Church Street. This was kind of odd because this was the first ad that I've seen of this type where they used the same address as the downstairs occupant. In this case, it would have still been Broughton, I think. And I'm not certain about that. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure. No, Broughton was there until 1987. I'll tell you how in just a second. But anyway, there was an architect there, and he had to occupy the second floor. Okay, number 35, Lee, we're almost out of time. Also in 1983, in November, this ad appeared. It's kind of a strange business. It says, here's how you benefit. You make new sales at your regular prices, no discounted. Since Capital Exchange pays your promotional cost to get these new sales, your trade dollar has cost you only the amount of your inventory. This means that you are only paying your wholesale costs on items you buy through Capital Exchange. I have no idea what kind of business this was. It makes no sense to me what they're even advertising. But then at the bottom it says Capital Exchange Incorporated barter system. So it seems to be some sort of, you put up some money, you get maybe some coupons or some vouchers or something, and you use those to buy other merchandise. I'm not sure how this works. It must not have worked very well because it didn't last very long. It's gone. And finally, item number 36, Lee, I mentioned that Broughton's didn't last very long after that last ad I showed you. By 1987, they were going out of business. And this ad appeared October 29th, 1987, and it says, notice, final 2 days, going out of business sale, on-spot discounts. We will offer additional discounts on all remaining furniture, living room, dining room, etc., etc. Savings up to 70%, Broughton's Furniture, 228 South Church Street. So this was the last business that I found listed that occupied. Oh, we got a call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello, caller.
How you, young man? Is this an HIG?
Yes, sir.
This is old man Bill Bridges' rest home in Tarver.
Yes, sir.
And I used to live in Rocky Mount. You know where Bob Moore's soda shop was?
Yes, sir, I do.
Well, I stayed right behind. I think it was Ivor Avenue, I think was the name of it.
Okay. Yes, sir.
And is Mr. Moore's store still there?
Oh, no. It's been gone a long time.
Uh-huh. Mr. Moore did too, ain't he?
Yes, sir. He's been gone a long time, too.
Is the son's paid off?
I see Joe around town occasionally. He watches the show, I think, so he may be listening tonight, but he's the only one of the sons that I knew personally. But as far as I know, Joe's still around.
But look, young man, you have a blessed day. Did you ever know dog golf? I'm trying to think of a man's name.
Well, that's okay, and I hate to cut you short. We're running out of time. We really have. We're at the top of our hour.
You have a blessed night. I will quit praying for you and your whole family.
Well, thank you, sir. God bless you. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye. Okay. Folks, that's going to do it. First night we ran slam out of time. Thank you so much for calling in, those that did, and for watching the show tonight. I thank all of you as well. Have a great week. Take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. We'll see you next week with more Wayback Wednesday. Good night.
During our 50 years as a custom home builder, we've built homes for nearly 40,000 families.